It took me many hours of research and 3 tries to come up with what I consider to be the perfect carrot cake. This one has elements from all my favorite bakers: Levy Beranbaum, Stella Parks, and Saffitz. As I finished developing this recipe, I started wondering whether ChatGPT could develop this recipe a lot faster and easier. So out of curiosity, I asked it for a carrot cake recipe in the style of Rose, Stella, and Claire. And here's what I got: a recipe in cups with no weights of ingredients. Seriously? Come on, ChatGPT, that's the easy part. So I read the recipe and it looked like the average of all the carrot cakes. ChatGPT got rid of the best and most unique attributes that those 3 brilliant bakers brought to the table. So if you want the most average carrot cake, there is always GPT. But if you want one that's really special and is written in grams, you've come to the right place. The base technique for this cake comes from Claire's book, The Dessert Person. A moist carrot cake is easy because it's an oil-based cake, not a butter cake. On top of that, it has a ton of moisture-giving carrots, which keeps it very, very moist. The trouble is that carrot cake can sometimes be too dense. That's where Claire's technique comes in. She whips the eggs and sugar for a very long time at a high speed. This gives the cake a lovely, soft, and airy texture. What Levy Beranbaum brings to this cake is cocoa powder. It's a small amount and you'd never know it was there, but it really helps to balance the sugar. Without it, it just doesn't taste right. For the frosting, I started out with Claire's brown butter cream cheese frosting. I liked the brown butter part, but a pound of powdered sugar was unbearably sweet and had an unpleasant, almost squeaky texture. That's where Stella Parks came to the rescue. She has a wonderful recipe for cream cheese frosting made with granulated sugar. I tried it and it worked like a charm. In only 15 minutes, granulated sugar completely dissolved in cream cheese. It was way less messy to work with than powdered sugar and produced a much better texture. Reducing the sugar in the cake batter doesn't work because it changes the texture. But reducing the sugar in the icing is totally doable. I cut down the sugar amount in half from what Claire and most bakers use, and it was still plenty sweet. Now let's talk about pineapple. It's a common addition to carrot cake, but my 3 baking heroes didn't use it, and I didn't either. Here's my theory about the purpose of pineapple. I believe it's added for acidity, because God knows this cake doesn't need any more sweetness. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Guess what has slightly more acidity and less sweetness than a pineapple? I'll give you a hint. It's my favorite ingredient. Pomegranate molasses! If you don't have it, don't worry. This cake comes out great even without it. All right, my friends, let's bake. Preheat the oven to 350 degrees with a rack in the middle. Spread 130 grams of walnuts on a parchment-lined half sheet and put it in the middle of the oven for 10 minutes or until the walnuts are aromatic and the inside looks golden. While the nuts are toasting, make the brown butter for the frosting. Put 2 sticks of butter into a small pan that's light in color and set over moderately high heat. Cover until the butter boils. This will take a couple of minutes. The cover will protect your stove from buttery explosions. Once the butter is completely melted and boiling vigorously, uncover it and whisk constantly until it starts to brown. The reason butter spits and splutters is that it's only 80% fat and 20% water. When the water comes to a boil, it turns to steam, and if this steam is not released, it can build up and erupt. That's why we are stirring it, to release the steam before it turns explosive. Another option is to cover the butter with a splatter screen and check on it frequently so that it doesn't burn. When your butter gets lots of little brown specks, take it off the heat and pour into a heat-proof bowl. If you leave it in the pan, it might continue to cook and burn. Leave it for a few hours to cool to room temperature while working on the cake. By the way, browning the butter is optional. The frosting is great with regular butter too. If you aren't planning to brown the butter, get it to room temperature now so that it's very soft by the time you make the frosting. When the walnuts are cool, chop them and move to a medium bowl. Don't wash the half sheet and don't discard the parchment. We'll use it for the cake. Add 70 grams of golden raisins and toss with 2 teaspoons of all-purpose flour. This will prevent them from sinking to the bottom of the cake. Both the walnuts and raisins are optional. Feel free to skip them or replace them with some other dry fruit or nut or even pumpkin seeds. This cake has a lot of carrots, a whole pound. That's the weight after peeling, trimming, and shredding. So start with about 1.5 pounds of carrot to make sure you have enough. We'll also need 2 inches of peeled ginger. Ginger is optional. If you don't like it, feel free to skip. But I think carrots and ginger are a wonderful combination. How you grate your carrots will make a big difference to the texture of your cake. Here is the size that my Cuisinart food processor produced. These almost look like julienne carrots. Here is the size that the fine holes of a box grater produced. That's too fine. It's almost like Parmesan cheese. And here is the size that the large holes on my box grater produced. That's the Goldilocks size for the cake. The pieces should still be very soft, but noticeable. For the ginger, we'll use the microplane zester and then measure out 2 packed teaspoons. You're welcome to double that or cut that in half depending on how much you like ginger. Preheat the oven to 350 degrees with a rack in the middle. Butter the same half sheet you used for toasting the walnuts. You don't need to be thorough. You just need the parchment to stick to it. Butter the parchment and any exposed parts of the half sheet, like the sides. If your parchment is slightly bigger than the pan, fold it over so that it stays nice and flat on the bottom. Set a medium bowl with a sifter over a scale and add 300 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour. I'm using King Arthur. Mine is very lumpy today. It must have sat in a Costco warehouse with something very heavy on top of it. Add 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Make sure both of those are fresh, in other words, not older than 1 year. 2 teaspoons of Diamond Crystal Kosher salt or 1 teaspoon of table salt. 1 tablespoon of Dutch processed cocoa powder, 2 teaspoons cinnamon, 1 teaspoon cardamom, 1 teaspoon powdered ginger, and a grating of nutmeg. If you don't have or don't like one of these spices, just skip it. Sift all these dry ingredients into a bowl. I know people don't like to sift things, but if you get this hand crank sifter, it's a piece of cake. See all my huge flour lumps? Let me get in there with my hand and break them up. If you have little crystals left over, that's your salt and sugar. Just dump them in. They'll dissolve just fine. I like to sift my ingredients 3 times. Believe it or not, it doesn't take any longer than if you take a whisk and start whisking them together. But it's much more reliable. I mean, you got the sifter out already, so why not? Crack 4 room temperature eggs into a bowl of a mixer. If you forgot to get them out, put them into warm water for 10 minutes before cracking. Add 2 teaspoons of vanilla, 300 grams of granulated sugar, 100 grams of light brown sugar, and 20 grams of pomegranate molasses. If you don't have it, try 2 teaspoons of balsamic vinegar or just skip. Fit the mixer with a whisk attachment and start beating on low speed. Increase the speed until you get to high and beat for 4 minutes. Slowly stream in 220 grams of some neutral oil. I'm using refined sunflower seed oil, but you can use grapeseed, avocado, or whatever oil you want that has no smell or taste. You want to add the oil slowly so that it has a chance to emulsify. If it's not getting absorbed, stop pouring and wait for it to emulsify before adding more. Add 60 grams of sour cream and beat until incorporated. Remove the bowl from the mixer and stir in the fresh ginger. Add all the dry ingredients and gently fold them in. Stop mixing as soon as the flour streaks disappear. You should see no more dry flour, but lumps are fine. Add the carrots, walnuts, and raisins. It will look like a lot. That's normal. Fold them in thoroughly. Take your time. All the carrots should be coated in the batter. Pour the batter into the prepared half sheet and spread evenly. Lift it up a few inches and drop it on the counter to release any big bubbles. Bake without convection in the middle of the oven for 25 minutes or until a knife comes out clean when you insert it in the middle of the cake. Get the cake out of the oven. Place on a cooling rack and let cool completely. While our cake is cooling, get the cream cheese out of the fridge and let it warm up for about an hour. When the cake is completely cool, fit the mixer with a paddle attachment. Add 226 grams of granulated sugar and a pinch of salt. Beat until the cream cheese is completely soft and creamy, about a minute. Scrape and beat another 30 seconds. Let the cream cheese sit for 15 minutes to give sugar a chance to dissolve. While that's happening, let's check up on our butter and get it to the same consistency as the cream cheese. It has cooled to room temperature and became solid again. Most recipes make a big deal about the butter and cream cheese being the same temperature to avoid lumps. But I think it's even more important for them to be the same texture. Combining them in their solid brick form is asking for trouble. Take a big spoon or spatula and mash the butter until it's creamy. If it feels a bit too loose, you can put it in the fridge for 5 minutes and mash thoroughly until creamy. Repeat this chilling and mashing step in 5-minute intervals until your cream cheese and butter feel similar and are within 10 degrees of each other. For example, right now my butter is 63 and my cream cheese is 60 and both are creamy, so I'm ready to proceed. Fit the mixer with a whisk attachment and whip the cream cheese for 1 minute. Add the butter and 2 teaspoons of vanilla and beat on high for 4 minutes, scraping down the bowl halfway through. Our frosting is ready and we can assemble our cake. Run a knife around the edges of the cake. Support the cake from the sides and turn it out onto a cutting board. You might need to shift the cake a little to end up in the right place. Peel off the parchment and trim the edges. Make sure that all the cutting happens with a serrated knife, otherwise you'll rip the cake. Here, I want you to see the texture up close. You can slice and dice this cake any way you want. It really just depends on your serving platter. I will make 3 layers that are 4 inches wide and will have a bit of the cake left over for snacking. I would be wary of cutting this cake into circles with a knife. It is so chunky that I worry you won't get a clean cut. If you have an 8 or 9 inch ring mold that you can press into the cake like a cookie cutter, go for it. Otherwise, just make a square or rectangular cake. I promise it is just as good. I've marked the places where I should cut on my board with tape to make sure I get perfectly even layers. Since the cake will stick to the board slightly, here's how to lift it. Run the knife under each piece, slide the knife under, and lift. Spread a little icing on the first layer and cover the sides. Then repeat with 2 more layers. Don't worry if you didn't place the layer just right. You can always shift it a little before you ice it. I wouldn't get carried away with icing. This cake is very moist, so a little goes a long way. You could even skip the icing entirely and bake this cake as muffins or a loaf cake. Once you get the cake completely covered in a very thin layer of icing, put it in the fridge for 30 minutes or freeze for 15. That's your crumb coat. It's messy and uneven. It's kind of like cake's underwear. Now we'll do another layer of icing that will be a lot more even and clean. that's better. I put the remaining icing into a bag fitted with an open star and piped a row of rosettes. That's my extent of cake decorating skill. Another option is to cut the cake into squares and pipe little blobs of icing on top. You can do that for each portion or make one big cake. Because the little blobs of icing are kind of cute, you don't have to ice the sides. The only word of warning is that it's hard to keep the individual portions from leaning and looking like the Tower of Pisa. You can serve this cake right away or refrigerate until needed. Once it's cold and stiff, gently cover it with plastic wrap. Just make sure to bring it back to room temperature for a couple of hours before serving. The icing will be a lot creamier and tastier this way. This recipe is very easy to half and bake in a quarter sheet pan in case you want a little cake. Today you saw me use an unseasoned baking sheet. Its shininess slows down the crust formation, which is a good thing when it comes to cakes. We don't want crispy edges. For roasting veggies, I use the same baking sheets, but I season them so that they produce much faster and better browning. If that's all you have, don't worry, your cake will be fine. Just put one baking sheet inside another one. This will insulate the bottom and will prevent it from browning too much. You can certainly bake this cake in 3 8-inch round cake pans, but that's only a good idea if you have cake strips. Here are more very detailed culinary tutorials for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.